They said the cliff swallowed secrets, that no one who heard the truth lived long enough to speak it. But they never counted on a war-worn veteran, or the shepherd who refused to let the mountain lie. Hours before the world learned what Wolfjaw had buried, a single bark echoed through the stone, the kind of sound that doesn't ask for attention, it demands justice. And for the first time in 14 years, the truth clawed its way back into the light. The wind came first, a long, low moan rolling across Wolfjaw cliffs, as if the mountain itself were grieving. Snow hammered the windows in hard, horizontal lines. The old cabin shook under every gust, its frame complaining in the dark. Caleb Rourke stood in the center of the single room, breath fogging the air. The place he had bought for $500 felt less like a home and more like a dare the wilderness had thrown at him. A cliffside shack stitched together with old timber and stubbornness. But it was quiet. And for a man who carried war inside his ribs, quiet was a luxury. Coda lay near the weak fire, his coat glowing amber and silver. Even resting, the dog looked coiled, ready, listening the way only a combat dog could. Caleb watched him, letting the steadiness of that presence ground him. They had crossed deserts together, survived blasts no human should stand through. If there was one creature on earth he trusted, it was the shepherd now watching the room with unblinking calm. Outside, the storm grew teeth. Snow hissed down the chimney. The fire snapped like it was being slapped. Then Coda lifted his head. No growl, no warning, just a stillness so sharp it sliced clean through the room. His ears tilted forward, his body turned toward the rock wall behind the fireplace. Caleb frowned. There was nothing there but stacked stone and soot. Still he felt the shift in the air, the same shift he had felt overseas, seconds before things went wrong. "What is it, buddy?" Coda rose slowly, muscles tight beneath his winter coat. He stepped toward the hearth, nose twitching, tail stiff. Then he let out a bark that cracked through the storm and the cabin like a thrown blade. Caleb's pulse kicked. That was not a bark of alarm or confusion. That was the precise, measured signal Coda had used in Iraq when he found something buried, something meant to stay hidden. He grabbed the flashlight from the table and ran the beam along the rock. At first he saw nothing but soot and age. Then the light caught something out of place. A faint line, straight as a ruler, cutting through the stone like a seam. Coda scratched once at the base, sharp, intentional. Caleb knelt, his gloved fingers brushed the mortar. Newer, smoother, wrong. Someone had sealed something here. "You're kidding me!" The storm slammed against the cabin again, rattling the chimney. Caleb pushed the crowbar into the seam, leverage grinding stone against stone. His breath quickened. Adrenaline woke the part of him that had always known how to move under pressure. The slab groaned. Coda barked again. Urgent. Insistent. Caleb forced the crowbar deeper and pushed harder. The slab shifted, snapped, then slid outward with a hollow sigh, as if the mountain had been holding its breath. Cold air spilled into the room, colder than the storm outside. Sharper. Metallic. Caleb shined the flashlight into the gap. What he saw slowed his heartbeat into something cold and deliberate. A narrow chute descended between natural rock and hand-carved stone. And far below, faint but real, came a sound. A soft, rhythmic tap. Not wind, not water. Something human. Caleb swallowed. His voice came rough. "Coda, do you hear that?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He simply stared into the darkness, ears pinned forward, body ready to spring. A living compass pointing at the truth buried under the cliff. Caleb angled the flashlight downward again. The walls of the chute bore scratches. Not random erosion. Marks, clawing. Someone had tried to get out. Or keep something in. A chill worked its way up his spine. This cabin was supposed to be empty for 14 years. Abandoned after the last owner vanished in midwinter. A rumor people in town whispered but never explained. Caleb had dismissed it as small-town superstition. Now he wasn't sure. The tapping from the darkness stopped. Silence swept through the room. Heavy. Waiting. Coda stepped closer to the opening, and for a moment Caleb swore the dog's breath fogged downward like the shaft was breathing back. Then a new sound drifted up. A faint clink. Metal against metal. Deliberate. Caleb jerked the flashlight away, heart slamming. No, that wasn't possible. The cold down there wasn't from a body. It was from stone. Old stone. Locked stone. He forced himself to look back into the chute. The light caught something half buried in dust. An edge of rusty metal. Then another. A box? No. A door hinge. Caleb blinked hard, adjusting the light. Beneath the rock lay a second surface. A panel carved directly into the cliffside, reinforced with iron bands. Someone had sealed a locked chamber inside the mountain itself. The storm howled. The temperature in the cabin dipped like a breath had been sucked out of the room. Coda pressed closer, letting out a low, vibrating sound that felt more like a warning drawn from instinct than fear. Caleb whispered to the dog, "You were right to bark." He shifted the crowbar, testing the edges of the hidden metal panel. It didn't budge. Not even a fraction. Whatever it covered had been designed to stay shut. Designed by hands that expected someone to find it someday. Or feared they would. Another sound rose faintly through the chute. A brief scrape. Then a single, hollow knock. Caleb froze. Every nerve lit. The knock came again. Slow. Final, like something answering back. Coda stepped between Caleb and the opening, body angled as if shielding him from the dark below. Caleb stared at the seam, breath unsteady. This cabin wasn't abandoned. It was hiding something. And tonight, for the first time in 14 years, that something knew it had been found. The storm tapered off near dawn, leaving the cabin wrapped in a cold, exhausted silence. Caleb hadn't slept. He sat on the floor beside the opening in the rock, Coda pressed close to his leg, warm and steady in the grey light. The dog hadn't stopped watching the chute, as if expecting the darkness to move again. Caleb brushed a hand over Coda's neck. The dog leaned in slightly, the smallest shift, but enough to pull Caleb out of the fog gathering in his head. "You remember Mosul, don't you?" It wasn't really a question. A memory rose before Caleb had time to push it back. Heat. Dust. The sharp metallic taste in the air right before everything went white. He had been disarming a pressure plate when a tremor in the ground told him he had misread the circuitry. He felt the shockwave before he heard it, but he never hit the ground. Coda had slammed into him, dragging him behind a concrete lip as the street exploded. Shrapnel tore the wall above his head. Windows shattered. The world rang. Coda stood over him, panting, a thin cut across his muzzle, eyes burning with the instinct to protect at all costs. 14 years later, the look hadn't changed. Caleb exhaled, pushing the memory aside. He refocused on the rock wall. The slab he had removed last night was thicker than he'd thought, the mortar freshly patched compared to the surrounding stone. Someone had sealed this deliberately. He angled the flashlight deeper into the opening. Something metallic glinted back. He reached in cautiously, fingertips brushing cold metal. A box lay half buried in dust and debris, its surface rusted but intact. He pulled it out slowly. Coda tensed, nose brushing the lid as if reading the scent of history trapped inside. The box wasn't locked. Caleb flipped it open. Inside lay several small objects, a broken wristwatch, a leather field pouch, and a notebook with a cracked spine. The first page held a name written in a precise, angled hand. Jonas Hale. Caleb felt his pulse shift. The locals in Red Summit had mentioned the name only in half sentences, as if it carried weight they didn't want to feel. A geologist contracted by the mining company. Disappeared during winter. Case never closed. 14 years ago. He opened the notebook. The entries at first were dry observations. Mineral composition, core samples, coordinates. Then the handwriting became tighter. The ink darker. Pressure deepening on the page. Day 47. The water near the lower fault turned strange. It ran silver in the morning light. Not ice, not silt. Something else. Caleb frowned. He turned the page. Day 54. Trucks arrived again at 2 in the morning. No headlights. Same route. Same men. Day 68. Found the artificial shaft. Reinforced. Not on the maps they gave me. Coda gave a low rumble, ears flicking at the word artificial, as if sensing the shift in Caleb's breathing. Caleb kept reading. Day 71. If they find what I know, I won't make it out. The truth is in the cliffs, inside the stone. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. Ink dragged sideways as if the hand writing it had been yanked away. Coda nudged the page, a soft whine humming in his throat. Caleb gently closed the notebook. The air in the cabin felt thinner now, the cold settling deeper. He reached back into the hidden space and pulled out the field pouch. Inside were laminated maps, worn at the folds. Red marks traced tunnels branching beneath Wolfjaw Cliffs. One tunnel had been circled 3 times with a sharp pencil. Next to it, Jonas had written 2 words. Do not enter. Caleb stared at the circled tunnel. The pencil stroke had torn slightly into the paper. A man who didn't scare easily had been terrified when he wrote those words. Behind him, Coda suddenly stiffened. His ears shot upward, his body angled towards the window. Caleb went still. A soft crunch outside. Snow compressed under weight. Slow. Intentional. They weren't alone. Coda let out a quiet, deliberate growl. Not loud, not meant to scare, meant to warn. Caleb moved with practiced calm, sliding along the wall to the window, peeking through a gap in the frost. At first he saw only white. Then a shadow. A human shape standing at the edge of the tree line, watching the cabin. Perfectly still. The figure took 1 step back, then melted into the woods. Caleb stayed frozen until the snow settled again. Coda pressed his shoulder against Caleb's leg, grounding him the way he had done 100 times during night sweats and flashbacks. The dog didn't tremble, didn't break focus. Caleb swallowed. Whoever that was, they knew exactly where to stand so they could see him, but he couldn't see them. He looked back at the notebook in his hand. Jonas Hale had written warnings, incomplete sentences, rushed entries. People don't vanish for no reason. Water doesn't turn silver on its own. Trucks don't move through mountains at night unless they carry something worth hiding. And a locked chamber carved into solid stone doesn't just appear under a cliffside cabin. Caleb closed the box. Coda's gaze stayed fixed on the door. Neither of them said a word. The past wasn't buried. It had been waiting. Red Summit sat at the bottom of the valley like a half-forgotten postcard, a line of wooden storefronts weathered by wind, time, and whatever secrets the mountain kept. Caleb drove in just after noon. The sun was out, but the light felt thin, as if the sky itself didn't trust the day. Coda rode shotgun, head high, watching every passing truck and pedestrian with the quiet vigilance of a soldier who never clocked out. When Caleb parked in front of the only cafe in town, the dog's ears twitched. Caleb noticed it instantly. You smell something. Coda didn't look away from the street. He didn't need to answer. Inside, the cafe was warm and dim, smelling of coffee, bacon grease, and cinnamon rolls that had probably been baked by the same person for the last 20 years. Conversation slowed the moment Caleb stepped in. Not stopped, just shifted, toned down, redirected. Veterans knew that silence. It was the kind that had nothing to do with manners. Caleb ordered coffee, black. Coda sat by his chair like a stone statue, gaze sweeping every corner. A middle-aged waitress with red-rimmed glasses poured the mug, then hesitated. "You're the one who bought the Cliffside cabin?" Caleb nodded. "That is what people keep calling it." She bit her lip. That place used to belong to Jonas Hale. Caleb watched her eyes drop, watched her hands tremble the slightest bit as she adjusted her apron. He pushed gently. "He disappeared, right?" "Around here, folks don't say disappeared. They say the mountain kept him." The way she whispered it made the words feel heavier than folklore. Before he could ask more, a chair scraped behind him. A young woman in a green parka slid into the booth opposite his without waiting for an invitation. Sharp eyes, dark curls pulled into a loose bun. A press badge clipped to her bag. "I'm Riley Torres, freelance. You're new here, but you're already stirring dust in places this town likes quiet." Caleb didn't answer right away. She took the silence as permission. Jonas was digging into Wolfjaw Mining before he vanished. She leaned in slightly. "Let me guess. You found something up there." Coda's head snapped toward Riley before Caleb even breathed. "Easy, Coda." Riley lifted her hands, palms open. "Not here to make trouble. Just trying to keep someone else from ending up in a missing person folder." Caleb watched her carefully. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. "What do you know about Jonas?" he asked, enough to know nobody wants his name spoken out loud, especially not Wolfjaw. They operate with a certain philosophy. Problems get fixed clean, loose ends get tied even cleaner. Caleb felt the weight of the notebook in his coat pocket. Riley noticed the shift in his posture. "You found something of his. I can tell by your face." Caleb took a slow sip of coffee. "If I did, why would I tell you? Because you're not stupid. If Wolfjaw gets wind you have anything that belonged to Jonas, they won't wait for ghosts to finish the job. And because you're a veteran, you know when a fight is already circling you." Something in her tone tugged at a tension in his chest. She wasn't wrong. Coda's gaze swept the windows with renewed focus. His muscles tightened. Not fear, not aggression, alertness. Riley followed the dog's stare, and her voice dropped. "Someone out there." Caleb didn't turn too quickly. Outside, a man in a brown jacket stood by a newspaper stand, pretending to read. But his eyes flicked towards the cafe window every few seconds. Caleb recognized the posture instantly. Military training, or someone paid by people with money. The waitress noticed too. She muttered under her breath, then hurried away before Caleb could ask anything else. Red Summit wasn't simply avoiding the truth. It was terrified of it. Riley leaned closer. "If you saw trucks on Jonas's maps, if you saw anything that looks like a shaft or hatches cut into solid rock, you need to be careful. Wolfjaw built half their empire by hiding the other half underground." Caleb stared at her. "Why does a reporter care this much?" "Because my uncle died working for them. They said it was an accident." Riley's jaw tightened. "But accidents don't get buried without autopsies." Something shifted then. Not trust yet, but alignment. Coda suddenly stood. No sound, just rose, body rigid. Caleb followed his gaze to the front door. The man in the brown jacket had moved closer. Riley whispered, "They followed you." Caleb stood, dropped cash on the table, and walked out calmly, Coda glued to his side. The man by the door didn't move, but his eyes tracked them with surgical precision. Coda growled. Quiet, controlled. A warning he almost never used in public. The man didn't flinch, but he didn't stay either. He stepped away, pretending to check a flyer, then crossed the street and disappeared behind a hardware store. Caleb waited until he was gone before exhaling. Back to the cabin. Riley called after him from the doorway. "If Jonas left you something, don't sit on it. And don't stay up there alone too long. People who look for answers on Wolfjaw Cliffs tend to vanish." Caleb didn't reply. but Coda looked back once, as if memorizing Riley's scent, filing it for later. The drive up the mountain was quiet. Too quiet. At the cabin, snow had drifted against the porch. Caleb stepped out of the truck and froze. Coda was already moving, nose down, weaving in tight circles. Caleb dropped to a knee beside him. Tracks. Fresh. Human. The prints circled the cabin, stopping directly under the window near the fireplace. Coda's growl deepened. Caleb felt the cold in his bones, not from the wind, but from the confirmation settling hard inside him. Someone had been here. Someone else knew about the hidden chamber carved into the rock, and whoever it was, they weren't done watching. The air inside the cabin felt different that morning, heavier, as if the walls themselves had been listening to the night. Caleb moved from window to window, checking every lock twice, but Coda didn't bother with doors. The dog stood in the center of the room, nose raised, muscles tight, tracking a scent that didn't belong. "What do you smell, boy?" Coda didn't look at him. He pivoted toward the fireplace, then the corner where the stone met the floorboards. He stepped forward, slow and intentional, nose pressed close to the rock. His body had gone still in that way Caleb had learned to fear and trust in equal measure. A warning without sound. Coda pawed at the stone once, then again, harder. Caleb knelt beside him. He ran his hands along the corner of the rock wall, searching for a seam like the one he'd uncovered earlier. The surface felt solid at first. Then his fingers caught an edge, a straight line hidden in the natural texture. Coda nudged the same spot, letting out a sharp breath. Caleb pressed his thumb along the line. The stone shifted. Not a wall, a door. His pulse rose. He grabbed the crowbar, worked it gently into the seam, and gave a steady push. The slab swung inward with a rough scrape, releasing a gust of air so cold it felt like stepping into another season. A narrow passage sloped downward. The walls were a mix of natural rock and crudely cut stone. Not a cave, not erosion. This was carved by human hands. Coda moved in first, tail stiff, body angled low like a soldier clearing a room. His paws clicked softly against the cold ground. Caleb followed, flashlight beam cutting through floating dust. 10 feet in, the smell hit him. Chemical, metallic, something industrial left too long in the dark. The passage opened into a small chamber. Rusted barrels lined one wall, their lids eaten away by time. On each one, barely visible under dust, was a faded blue logo. Wolfjaw Mining Company. Caleb's breath clouded the air. He stepped closer, shining the light into a crack on one of the barrels. Inside was sludge the color of bruised silver, thick and unmoving. This is what Jonas was tracking. Coda growled softly, not toward the barrels, but toward a far corner of the chamber where something lay half-buried under rubble. Caleb moved toward it. A camera, battered, lens cracked, battery case bent, but still intact enough to hold a memory card. His heart kicked hard. He wiped dust from the screen. It flickered, dead. He ripped out the memory card, slid it into the small field reader he carried for photos and maps. The video blinked to life. Jonas Hale appeared on screen, pale under the harsh light of a headlamp. His breath fogged the camera. His voice shook, but not from cold. If someone finds this, then they know I was right. The water source below the ridge is contaminated, not naturally, not by accident. They've been pumping waste into the old aquifer for years. Arsenic, mercury, chemicals that should never touch groundwater. They told me to stop asking questions. A metallic thud sounded in the background. Jonas flinched, looking over his shoulder. They know I have proof. If I don't make it out of this, the truth is right behind the Cliffside face. They hid everything in the stone. The screen jittered as Jonas angled the camera toward a map sketched onto the wall. A large circle marked an area deeper in the ridge. Then footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Jonas's voice dropped. "If I die here, tell someone. Don't let them bury this." The final seconds were nothing but panic. A shout. Boots scraping rock. The camera tumbled, capturing the blurred image of a hand reaching. Then a sharp, strangled cry. The video cut out. Caleb stared at the frozen screen, jaw clenched. Some part of him expected the chamber to answer back with echoes of Jonas's scream, but the space stayed silent. Coda pressed against Caleb's leg, eyes locked on the dark path beyond the room, tail low and stiff. The dog wasn't afraid. He was warning Caleb that the danger Jonas faced hadn't died with him. Caleb replayed Jonas's words silently, right behind the cliffside face. He aimed the flashlight at the chamber walls. One looked carved deeper than the others. The grooves were deliberate, wide enough for machinery to pass through. He stepped closer, running a hand along the stone. A breeze brushed his fingers, not cold like the chamber. Fresh, moving, a second tunnel, concealed. Coda barked once, sharp, echoing down the rock corridor. The sound bounced back strangely, as if the mountain responded with its own heartbeat. Caleb felt the shift immediately. The floor beneath his boots vibrated, faint, rhythmic, something moving below. He pulled back, raising the light toward the hidden passage. Dust drifted as if something had stirred the air beyond the sealed rock. Coda's body tightened, his teeth bared in silent threat. Caleb whispered, "Someone's been down here recently." He clicked off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them both. He listened. The mountain breathed. The barrels groaned softly. The faint scent of chemical rot clung to the cold. Then footsteps. Not Jonas's, not echoes. Fresh, above them, inside the cabin. Caleb looked at Coda, the dog's ears pinned forward, his body angled toward the passage they had entered. He was ready to charge the moment Caleb gave the signal. Someone had followed them, and now they were standing where only Jonas Hale once stood. Coda growled again, deeper this time. Caleb tightened his grip on the crowbar. The truth wasn't just sealed in the rock, it was guarded. Night settled over Wolfjaw Cliffs with an unease that felt almost intentional. The wind had died, yet the cabin creaked like something pressed against it from the outside. Caleb tried to read Jonas's notebook again, but the words kept blurring. Coda paced near the window, moving in tight, restless circles, the low whine in his throat pulsing like a radar sweep. "What is it, boy?" Coda stopped. His ears snapped forward. His body leaned toward the dark glass. Caleb killed the lantern. The room fell into shadow. Only the faint glow of snow outside lit the edges of the window. Coda stepped closer, nose nearly touching the glass. Caleb followed his gaze. Headlights, two white beams creeping between the pines, silent, controlled. A black SUV rolled into view and idled near the tree line. Not close enough to threaten, but close enough to watch. Caleb's pulse spiked. He grabbed the rifle by the wall, but didn't raise it yet. He waited. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, jacket zipped high. He didn't hurry, didn't sneak. He walked toward the cabin with the slow confidence of someone who believed he had every right to be there. Coda shifted, blocking the door. With his body, the exact stance he had used to shield Caleb overseas. Silent. Ready. A firm knock broke the air. Caleb stayed still. Another knock. Then a voice muffled by the cold. "Sheriff Madsen." "Open the door, Caleb." Caleb hesitated. Madsen had a reputation in town. People spoke his name with the same tone they used for Wolfjaw mining. A tone that suggested power didn't need to be earned, only enforced. Still, Madsen knew his name. That alone meant something. Caleb cracked the door but kept the chain on. Coda pressed against his leg, teeth quietly exposed. Sheriff Madsen stood under the porch light, snow collecting on his hat brim. His face was rough, wind-burned, with eyes that had seen more than he'd ever admit. "Mind lowering the growl," he said. eyeing Coda. I'm not here for trouble. You bring an SUV to a cliff in the middle of the night, Caleb replied. Trouble usually rides shotgun. Madsen exhaled, a cloud drifting into the cold. Just let me in before someone else sees my truck parked here. Someone else. That was enough. Caleb removed the chain and opened the door. Coda didn't move aside, forcing Madsen to step around him. Smart dog, the sheriff muttered. He's alive because he is, Caleb said. Madsen's gaze flicked toward the fireplace, then the floor, then the wall where the hidden passage waited behind stone. He didn't ask. He already knew something was there. I saw your prints near the ridge today, the sheriff said. And you've been asking about Jonas. That's not a good combination in this town. Caleb folded his arms. Why are you here? Madsen pulled off his gloves slowly, rubbing his hands as if working warmth back into them. Then he lowered his voice. Because you're walking the same path Jonas did. And I watched what happened to him. Coda's head lifted sharply. Caleb didn't blink. Madsen continued. 14 years ago, Jonas came to me with a theory. Wolfjaw Mining was dumping waste into the lower aquifer, poisoning water that fed half the valley. He had samples, maps, proof. He thought a sheriff might actually care. And you didn't? Madsen flinched like the words struck him. I did, more than you'd think. But Wolfjaw found out. They leaned on me. Hard. They threatened my family. One day Jonas went missing. They made sure I understood it wasn't just an accident. They gave me a chance to keep breathing if I kept quiet. Coward, Caleb said softly. Madsen didn't deny it. His jaw tightened. You think you're different, but you're already marked. You bought his cabin, you dug up something, and someone has been watching you since the day you arrived. Caleb felt Coda press against him again. The dog already knew. Why tell me this now? Because the men who silenced Jonas are cleaning up loose ends again. And I'm done being one of them. Madsen reached into his coat. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. Relax. If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't knock. He pulled out a folded topographic map. Edges worn, ink faded. In spots. This is where the waste goes. The real dump site. Not on any public survey. Not on company records. These are the shafts Jonas found. And the big one, the one he circled, that's the deep vent tied to an old military tunnel system. Wolfjaw repurposed it. You find that, you find everything. He handed the map to Caleb. His hand shook slightly. You can't go alone, Madsen said quietly. They'll kill you before you take 2 steps inside. But if they find out I told you anything, they'll kill me first. So why risk it? Because someone has to finish what Jonas started, and because you're the only fool with a dog brave enough to sniff out hell itself. A sudden crunch of snow snapped all 3 heads toward the window. Coda froze, ears sharp, eyes locked. Another crunch. Someone was outside. Madsen swore under his breath. They followed me. Or you. Doesn't matter. He grabbed Caleb's arm. Listen to me. You have hours, not days. Whatever is sealed under this mountain, they're safeguarding it again. And if you don't move fast, you'll vanish just like Jonas did. Coda growled, deeper than Caleb had heard in weeks. The sheriff backed toward the door. I was never here, Caleb. Before Caleb could answer, Madsen slipped into the night, leaving only the map and the echo of his warning. Coda pressed his nose to the window, breath fogging the glass. A shadow moved near the tree line. Then another. Caleb whispered, It's starting, boy. Coda's growl was his only reply. Snow hammered the cliffside like a drumbeat, fast and relentless, the kind of storm that made the world feel smaller, tighter, more dangerous. Caleb had barely slept since Sheriff Madsen's warning. Every sound outside the cabin felt sharpened, every gust of wind like a footstep. Coda sensed it too. He stayed on alert, pacing the room in quiet loops, nose lifting at the faintest vibration. Just past midnight, he froze. Not a twitch, not a growl. Absolute stillness. Caleb looked up from the map spread across the table. What is it? Coda's ears pinned forward. His hackles rose, a slow bristle. Then he lunged, teeth clamping onto Caleb's jacket sleeve, yanking hard. Caleb stumbled. Coda pulled again, louder this time, a choked sound vibrating through his chest. It wasn't panic, it was command. Then the first gunshot cracked through the window. Shards exploded inward. The lantern blew out. Glass scattered across the floor like ice. Caleb hit the ground as a second round tore into the log wall behind him. They found us. Coda darted toward the fireplace and barked twice, sharp and urgent, not random. Caleb understood. The hidden passage. Boots crunched outside the front door. Voices. Men. At least 4. Moving with military precision. Caleb grabbed his rucksack, Jonas's notebook, the sample jars, and Madsen's map. He crawled toward the hearth as Coda pawed frantically at the stone slab. Another gunshot split the air. Wood chips rained down. Caleb wedged the crowbar, popped, the slab free, and Coda dove in first. Caleb followed and pulled the stone halfway back over the opening, just as the cabin door burst open above them. Shouts poured in. Flashlights swept across the room. Heavy footsteps shook dust into the passage. Caleb whispered into the darkness. Easy, boy, keep moving. The tunnel dropped them into a narrow crawl space that angled down deeper into the rock. The air grew colder, stiller, heavy with minerals and old secrets. Coda led with his nose low, each step measured, cautious but unwavering. Above them, muffled voices echoed. They're in the tunnels. Spread out, no mistakes. Bring back the files, and bring the dog too. Caleb clenched his jaw. They wanted Coda. That meant they knew exactly what Jonas had discovered, and exactly who they were dealing with now. The passage widened into a larger chamber carved by both nature and tools. Old mining beams craned overhead. Rusted rails ran across the ground like a forgotten root system. Coda sniffed the air, then bolted left. Caleb followed just as a flashlight beam swept across the opposite end of the chamber. They were seconds ahead. A thunder of boots echoed behind. Caleb ducked into a smaller corridor. The air tasted metallic. Chemical. Wrong. Coda coughed once, sneezing from the stench. Caleb lifted the flashlight and froze. Dozens of metal barrels lined the walls, their hazard symbols faded but unmistakable. Wolfjaw mining stenciled across every one. Some leaked a glistening film that hissed when it touched the stone. God! He had seen chemical pits in Mosul, in the ruins of collapsed factories. This was worse. This was deliberate. Coda nudged a small locker half buried in dust. Caleb kicked it open. Inside lay folders. Dozens. Payment logs. Bribes. A roster of employees who signed NDAs under threat of termination. Or worse. Caleb grabbed what he could. His pulse hammered. This was enough to bury Wolfjaw for good. Footsteps thundered into the chamber. Coda growled deep and low. Caleb spun as a figure stepped into the beam of his light. A man in a mining jacket, goggles perched on his forehead. His chest rose and fell fast, not from running but from fear. Caleb raised his fists. Back up. The man shook his head fiercely. No, I'm not here to kill you. Caleb didn't buy it. You're with them. Used to be, the man whispered, until you pulled me out of that landslide last week. You don't remember, but I do. You saved my life while Wolfjaw told them to leave me buried. My name's Mason. I ran Jonas's equipment last year. I know where this tunnel leads. I know what they did. More voices echoed in the corridor behind him. They were close. Mason stepped forward, hands trembling. Jonas didn't die from a fall. He didn't get lost. The boss killed him himself. Threw him down the vent shaft when he refused to drop the story. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. Proof? Mason pointed toward the far end of the chamber. A narrow vent shaft dropped straight down, its rim rusted and cracked. "Jonas filmed everything," Mason said. "I saw part of it. They never found his backup drive. If you did, then they'll tear this whole mountain apart to get it from you." Coda suddenly barked, jumping between Caleb and the corridor. Flashlights flared to life. They were out of time. Mason yelled, "This way! Now!" Caleb grabbed Coda's collar and sprinted after the miner. They ducked into a tight passage that twisted like a vein through the mountain. Voices chased them, bouncing off stone. Coda never hesitated. He ran ahead, choosing turns before Caleb could. His instincts were certainty itself. The tunnel opened into another chamber. A roar vibrated through the rock. A waterfall fed into an underground river that cut through the cliffside before plunging into the canyon. Mason pointed to a maintenance lift bolted into the wall. It was barely holding together. If we ride it down, we hit the lower shaft. They won't follow. Too unstable. Caleb shoved Coda onto the lift. Mason climbed in next. Boots pounded into the chamber behind them. "Take us down," Caleb said. Mason pulled the lever. The lift screeched into motion just as figures surged into the room, weapons raised. Bullets sparked off the metal frame. Coda barked furiously, trying to lunge back toward Caleb, but Caleb held him tight. "We're not dying today, boy." The lift dropped into darkness. Caleb heard the shouts above. He heard the metal groan. He heard Coda's breathing pressed tight against his chest. And he heard Mason whisper, barely audible over the roar of the falls. Jonas was right. The truth is buried deep. But you two might be the ones to bring it back to the surface. The lower shaft rumbled beneath them like a living thing. Every beam groaned. Every stone seemed to shift under its own weight. Caleb felt the tremors before he heard the blast. A deep concussion wave swept through the tunnel. Then the world erupted. The explosion hit from somewhere behind, slamming Caleb into the rock. Dust swallowed everything. The ground heaved, a violent shudder that knocked him to his knees. Mason vanished in the choking haze. The lift cables snapped with a metallic scream and dropped into the abyss. Caleb tried to stand, coughing hard. But then the ceiling gave way. A wall of stone crashed down, blocking the corridor in an instant. One boulder pinned Caleb's leg, forcing a raw cry from his throat. Pain shot white-hot through his body. He clawed at the debris, but the weight was immovable. Coda appeared through the dust like a ghost materializing. The dog's coat was coated in grey powder, eyes burning with frantic determination. He barked once, reached Caleb's side, and began digging at the rock with his paws, scraping until his pads bled. "Coda, stop. You'll tear yourself up." But the shepherd refused. He lowered his powerful jaw and bit into the edge of the stone, tugging with everything he had. The rock didn't move. Caleb felt his breath falter. "Go, get out." That's an order. Coda didn't even blink. He lunged again, wedging his shoulder into the gap, bracing his whole body. His claws screeched across the stone, his muscles trembling with effort. A deep growl vibrated in his chest, not at an enemy, but at the mountain itself, as if he could intimidate it into letting Caleb go. Another tremor shook the shaft. A steel beam fell behind them, sparking as it hit rock. Caleb grabbed Coda's neck, meeting the dog's eyes. "You saved me once already. Don't throw your life away." Coda barked sharply in his face. No, it wasn't a request. It was a promise. He threw his weight again, and again. His paws slipped in the dust. His shoulder bruised against the boulder. But finally, the stone shifted a half-inch. Caleb felt the pressure on his leg ease. A second shift, then another. With a final heave, Coda dragged the boulder enough for Caleb to yank his leg free. Pain shot up his thigh. He collapsed forward, gasping. Coda nudged his face gently, whining, but the sound was weak. Only then did Caleb see the dark smear on the dog's flank. Blood. A jagged piece of rebar stuck out from Coda's ribs, buried deep. The dog had taken it in the collapse and still kept pulling. Caleb's throat closed. Coda. The shepherd swayed, but steadied himself, trying to stand guard even now. Voices echoed down the tunnels. Flashlights. The Wolfjaw extraction team was closing in. Caleb pushed through the pain, hauled himself upright, and slung Coda over his shoulders as best he could. The dog didn't resist. He just pressed his muzzle to Caleb's neck and exhaled. "We're getting out of here, I swear it!" Caleb limped through the shaking tunnel, using the map in his mind more than the fading flashlight. He climbed toward the outer vents, toward cold air, toward the cliffside. He burst out onto a narrow ledge just as headlights lit the snow below. Black SUVs, armed men. They'd come to finish the job. Caleb set Coda down gently behind a rock outcropping. "Stay with me. Just stay." Coda's breathing was shallow, but his eyes were locked on Caleb, refusing to close. Down below, a familiar, cracked voice rose through the storm. "Caleb Rourke, drop the pack and step forward. You're trespassing on private property and interfering with corporate operations." The CEO, Elton Creve, stepped into the open. His coat flapped in the wind, his confidence untouched by the weather. Men fanned out around him, rifles raised. Caleb's heart pounded. They would kill him, bury the evidence, and no one would ever know. Then another sound ripped through the gale. A helicopter. Its spotlight cut the storm wide open, blasting the ledge with a blade of white. Federal agents. Their emblems glinted in the light. A voice boomed through a speaker. "Alton Creve, drop your weapon. You are under federal investigation for environmental crimes and obstruction." Creve's face twisted in rage. He spun toward the cliffs. Who tipped them off? Caleb didn't. Have to guess. A second set of headlights approached the ridge road. Sheriff Madsen stumbled out, waving frantically at the helicopter. "Up here! He's up here! Caleb's alive!" Behind him, Riley Torres climbed out, her camera slung over her chest, phone flashing in the storm. "We're live-streaming this," she shouted. "Try spinning it now." Creve's men faltered. The world was watching. Caleb stepped out from the rocks, holding the pack of evidence high. "It's over." Jonas Hale didn't vanish. "You murdered him, and you poisoned this entire valley." Creve raised a pistol, screaming over the wind. "You have no idea what you're doing." But before he could fire, Coda rose behind Caleb, staggering into view despite his wound. He stood tall, teeth bared, blood staining the snow around him. The agents saw him. The cameras saw him. A chorus of voices erupted. "Weapon down! Now!" Creve hesitated, caught between the dog, the federal guns, and the flashing red record light. Then he dropped the pistol. The storm swallowed the clatter. Agents surged forward, cuffing him and his men. Madsen limped up the ridge toward Caleb, breath shaking. "You made it! Good God, son, you made it!" Caleb didn't answer. He dropped to his knees beside Coda. The shepherd's eyes were still bright, but the light behind them flickered like a dying ember. "Coda, stay with me. You hear me? Stay." Coda leaned his head into Caleb's palm, exhaled softly, and closed his eyes. Not in surrender. In trust. Helicopter blades thundered overhead as medics rushed forward. Snow whipped around them, swirling in white arcs. Caleb clutched Coda's fur and whispered through the storm. "You brought justice up this mountain, boy. Don't leave before you see the rest." Coda didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the snow. Weak, but alive. The storm roared on, but for the first time since he'd arrived at Wolfjaw Cliffs, Caleb felt the mountain shift in their favor. The truth had surfaced. The valley had witnesses. And his dog, battered and bleeding, was still fighting beside him. Justice had come in a hurricane of snow and steel, and Coda had stood at the center of it, unbroken. Not a soldier's dog, a hero. The spring thaw came late to Wolfjaw Cliffs that year. Even in April, pockets of snow clung to the shadowed ridges like old ghosts refusing to leave. But the cabin on the cliffside, rebuilt from the same foundation where the truth first surfaced, stood warm against the cold. Caleb pushed open the newly crafted door, letting the afternoon light spill inside. Fresh-cut pine scent mingled with coffee. The place no longer felt like a hideout. It felt lived in, earned. The scars on the wood matched the ones on the man who lived there. Behind him, Coda padded in slowly, his gait still slightly off on the left side. Thick fur covered most of the surgical scar along his ribcage, but a pale crescent remained visible in the light. He carried it the same way Caleb carried his own wounds, not proudly, but without shame. "Good boy," Caleb murmured, tugging gently at the dog's ear. "Almost time." Coda nudged his leg and walked toward the porch, where the wind carried the distant hum of activity from the ridge road. The valley had changed in the past year. Dump sites sealed, water treatment underway, federal teams still documenting evidence. For once, the noise coming from Wolfjaw was the kind that built things rather than buried them. Caleb grabbed his jacket, stepped outside, and followed the path down toward the overlook. A temporary stage had been set up on the rock plateau, simple, respectful. Reporters and townsfolk gathered under the open sky. Riley Torres stood at the center, camera gear slung across her shoulder, directing her small crew with the calm confidence of someone who had learned how to make the truth louder than fear. She spotted Caleb and waved him over. "We start in 10. You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be," he answered. She laughed softly. "That's what you said the day we confronted the waterboard in Helena, and you still crushed it. I told them what Jonas found. You're the one who made the world listen." "Maybe," she said, "but I didn't have a dog stealing the whole documentary. People love him." Coda, as if on cue, sat down between them with a heavy thump, tail sweeping the dust behind him. The small cluster of children nearby instantly whispered his name like he was a legend come to life. Riley crouched to scratch behind his ears. And he deserves every bit of it. A federal representative stepped onto the stage, signaling the ceremony would begin. Caleb took a breath and moved closer with the crowd. At the edge of the platform stood a newly placed granite marker, the inscription freshly carved. "In memory of Jonas Hale, geologist, whistleblower, truth seeker, lost to the cliffs, but not to silence." A hush fell across Red Summit. A year ago, the town had whispered Jonas's name like a warning, a story better left unspoken. Now they said it with reverence. The representative addressed the crowd. "What Mr. Hale uncovered saved this valley, and what Mr. Caleb Rourke brought to light ensured justice was carried out. Today, we honor both the man who tried and the man who finished what he started." Caleb shifted uncomfortably under the attention. He never wanted the spotlight. But when he glanced at Coda, who sat tall beside him, he steadied. Coda didn't mind the eyes on him. He faced the crowd with calm certainty, as if he understood all of this had begun with his single bark in the storm. Riley lifted her camera. Rolling. The representative handed Caleb a small, polished box containing the official whistleblower citation and pressed a second medal into his palm. "For the dog," he said with a quiet smile. "Heroism comes in many forms." Coda sniffed the medal, sneezed, then licked Caleb's hand. A ripple of soft laughter spread through the crowd. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped to the microphone. He looked at the polished stone marker, the sky, then the people who had once eyed him with suspicion. "I didn't come here to expose anyone. I came here because I didn't know how to live with the past. But this land, it has a way of forcing truth to the surface." He looked at Coda again. "And sometimes it takes someone with 4 legs to show you where to dig." The crowd laughed again, but gently, warmly. Jonas didn't die because he was reckless. Caleb continued. He died because he was right, and because powerful people thought no one would ever find what he found. But he wasn't alone. People like Riley, like Sheriff Madsen, they stepped up when it mattered. A murmur of acknowledgement moved through the audience. Madsen stood off to the side, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. He still carried guilt, but today his head was held higher. "And this town," Caleb said, voice steadying. "You didn't turn away this time. You faced it. And you're fixing what was broken." He stepped back as quiet applause rose. Coda nudged his hand again, wanting direction, wanting to know what came next. Caleb knelt and pressed his forehead against Coda's. "Thank you, partner." The shepherd closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, a soft rumble of contentment vibrating through him. After the ceremony, Riley joined them on the overlook. The sun broke through the clouds, casting warm gold across the cliffside. "You know," she said, "the documentary isn't finished yet. People want to hear what you're doing now." Caleb looked down at the rebuilt cabin, the smoke curling from its chimney, then at the crowds dispersing, then at Coda, who trotted ahead on the trail with renewed strength. "I'm staying," he said, "at least long enough to make sure the water runs clean, and long enough for Coda to learn that he's not done protecting this place." Riley smiled. "Then we'll tell that story too." As they walked back toward the cabin, the wind shifted, brushing past them with a familiar cold whisper from the ridge. Not haunting this time, more like acknowledgement. For the first time since Jonas Hale had vanished, Wolfjaw Cliffs felt watched over rather than threatened. And Coda, scars and all, walked as if he had claimed the mountain himself. The air atop Wolfjaw Cliffs carried the faint bite of early autumn, sharp enough to wake the senses but gentle enough to feel like a promise. The rebuilt cabin sat quiet under the afternoon sun, its cedar boards warm, its windows reflecting the endless sweep of forest and sky. It had been almost a year since the truth came out, long enough for the town to heal, long enough for the land to breathe again. Caleb stood on the porch, watching a school bus wind slowly up the gravel road. Coda lay beside him, chin resting on his paws, fur touched with new streaks of grey around the muzzle. Age had softened his stance, but not dulled the alert flicker in his eyes. He still watched the ridgeline as if it held secrets only he could sense. The bus stopped, brakes hissing. A teacher stepped out first, followed by a dozen sixth-graders buzzing with excitement. Cameras dangling. Notebooks ready. "Mr. Rourke, thank you for having us," the teacher said, offering a warm smile. Caleb nodded. "It's good to have young minds out here. Reminds the place it's more than what happened." The kids gathered in a half-circle near the porch, some whispering, others staring openly at Coda like he was a mythical creature. He didn't mind. He simply lifted his head, blinked at them, and thumped his tail once. A boy with freckles raised his hand immediately. "Is it true you and your dog took down, like, an entire mining company?" Caleb laughed softly. "Depends who you ask. We didn't take anyone down. We just uncovered something that needed to be seen." A girl with braids leaned forward. "But Coda found the tunnel, right? The first one?" Caleb hesitated, glancing at the shepherd. Coda watched him, ears tilting slightly at the sound of his name. The question carried more weight than the kids realized. They wanted a story, but what they deserved was the truth behind the story. The part that didn't fit into headlines or documentaries. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "He found it. I didn't even know there was anything to find." "Why?" the girl pressed. "Why him?" Before Caleb could answer, Coda stood with effort, walked down the porch steps, and sniffed at the girl's shoes. She froze, then giggled when his tail brushed her knee. The other children edged closer. The teacher shot Caleb an apologetic look. "He's fine," Caleb assured her. He's gentle. He's always been gentle unless he senses danger. One boy knelt down, whispering to Coda. How'd you know where to look, buddy? Coda nudged the boy's hand, then wandered back to Caleb's side. He sat heavily, bones settling with the soft weariness of a dog who had lived a hard life and earned his rest. Caleb took a breath, letting the silence settle. The cliffs stretched out behind him, their edges carved by centuries of wind and water, and one man's buried truth. You all want to know how he found the tunnel? He finally said. But the real question isn't how, it's why. The children quieted, sensing a story shifting into something deeper. Coda wasn't trained to find caves. He wasn't trained to sniff out corruption. He learned explosives, human scent, danger, survival. But that night on the cliff, he didn't bark because he heard something familiar. He barked because something was wrong in the way the world felt. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Sometimes truth hides in places people don't want to see. Adults look away. Companies cover it. Towns forget it. But dogs don't ignore what feels wrong. They move toward it. The girl with braids raised her hand again. So he saved you? Coda saved me more times than I can count. But that night, he saved this whole valley. Caleb looked at the shepherd with something close to reverence. Truth didn't start with my voice. It started with his bark. A hush fell over the group. Even the wind seemed to pause. One boy, quieter than the rest, lifted his hand timidly. My dad worked for Wolfjaw. He said he didn't know what was happening. He felt really bad. Caleb crouched so he was eye level with the boy. Most people didn't know. Some who did tried to speak up. And some were scared. What matters is what people choose to do when they learn the truth. The boy nodded slowly. Another student shuffled forward. Are you going to train Coda's puppies to be rescue dogs? Caleb chuckled. No puppies for him. He's earned his retirement, but we are building a program. Me, Sheriff Madsen, Riley Torres, a youth outdoor training program. A place to teach tracking, conservation, first aid, and stewardship of this land. Coda will be the mascot, if he wants the job. Coda glanced up as if he'd heard his name again, and gave one slow, approving tail sweep. The children erupted in delighted chatter. Before they left, the teacher gathered them for a final photo. Caleb leaned on the porch railing. Coda sat beside him, stoic as a monument. Behind them, the cliffs rose in jagged lines, burned clean by time and truth. After the bus pulled away, Riley appeared from the trail below, holding her camera. How'd they do? She asked. Better than most adults, Caleb answered. They asked the right questions. She pointed the lens at Coda. Did you tell them the part where he saved you by dragging you out of the tunnel with half the ceiling coming down? Caleb's smile faded into something softer. No, some things are just for us. Riley lowered the camera, reading the shift in his tone. Caleb knelt again beside the shepherd. Coda leaned heavily into his chest, breathing deep and slow. The years had caught up to him, but there was still strength in the way he held himself. Still fire. You didn't just find a tunnel, Caleb whispered into his fur. You changed everything. Coda closed his eyes. The wind brushed the cabin. The cliffs hummed faintly. And Caleb felt it again. The same truth he told the children. Sometimes the world doesn't speak in words. Sometimes it speaks in a single bark, at the exact moment fate needs one. Coda had barked, and the mountain had answered. The sun sank low over Wolfjaw cliffs, turning the stone faces into molten copper. Shadows stretched long across the valley, swallowing the scars left behind by drills, trucks, and buried secrets. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant hum of the river far below. Evening always felt different here, quieter, honest. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands, though he barely drank it anymore. It was more ritual than necessity. A way to mark the hour when the world softened. Coda already lay on the crest of the slope overlooking the cliffs, his silhouette steady against the glow of the dying sun. Even with the grey around his muzzle, even with the scar along his ribs pulling slightly when he breathed, he held himself like the same dog who had leapt into the unknown without hesitation. Caleb walked toward him and sat beside him in the dirt. The shepherd shifted just enough so their shoulders touched. A silent greeting. "You hear it too, don't you, boy?" Coda's ear flicked, acknowledging something only he could interpret in the wind. The cliffs had their own voice now. Not the deceptive quiet of buried wrongdoing. Not the mechanical churn of trucks lining up in the dark. Just the wind threading through narrow cracks, through the fissure where a life had been lost and the truth had been sealed. The sound carried like a memory, faint and restless. Caleb watched the last sliver of sun dip behind the ridge. That light reminded him of the helicopter search beams the night everything changed. The moment justice finally arrived, not from the ground, but from the sky, slicing through the storm. A contrast so sharp, he still felt it in his chest. Coda let out a soft exhale, the kind that came from age and contentment. But his eyes stayed open, focused, watching the cliffs as if they still needed guarding. A year ago, he had dragged Caleb out of a collapsing tunnel, muscle by muscle, fighting rocks and smoke and time. Now he simply lay here, older, slower, yet somehow more powerful in his stillness. Caleb rubbed his hand gently along his companion's back. "You didn't bark because you were scared that night." Coda lifted his head. Caleb whispered the words slowly, as if giving shape to something he'd carried unspoken for months. "You barked because the truth was trapped in the stone, because someone had to hear it, and you decided that someone was me." Coda leaned gently against him, not demanding attention, not asking for praise, just confirming the bond that had never once failed them. The wind shifted again. Down the trail, the trees swayed in unison. From the cabin behind them, the faint smell of dinner drifted out. Potatoes Riley had dropped off earlier, insisting Caleb eat something that wasn't canned beans for once. The world, for the first time in a long time, felt settled. Caleb let the moment breathe. He let the horizon fade fully into night. Stars appeared in thin, scattered trails. "You know," he said quietly, "we didn't fix everything. There are still fights out there, still stories buried in some other ridge, some other forgotten town." Coda nudged his hand as if to say that was never the point. "We did what we were meant to do here." Caleb continued. "Jonas's name is cleared. The water's clean again. Madsen. Well, he's a better man now than he ever was wearing the badge. And Riley's documentary is waking people up all across the Rockies." He took a long breath. "But none of it would have happened without the first step you took, or the first bark you gave." Coda settled down again, stretching his paws in front of him. He blinked slowly, the way he did whenever he understood the weight. Behind Caleb's tone. Far across the valley, a light flickered from a ranger outpost. Someone making their rounds. Someone else listening to the land. Caleb stood, brushing dirt from his hands. He turned toward the cabin, but paused when Coda didn't immediately follow. The shepherd stayed where he was, gaze fixed on the cliffs, posture strong despite age. "Still watching?" Caleb murmured. "Still guarding." It made sense. Coda had always known when the world needed sound and when it needed silence. The camera, imagined or real, would have pulled back then. A slow retreat from the porch, from the ridge, from the man and the dog silhouetted against a vast Montana sky. The wind carried one final whisper across the stone, echoing the vow carved in the land. He didn't bark for danger. He barked for the truth still trapped in the stone. As the darkness deepened and stars multiplied overhead, a single line rose across the screen, carried by the quiet of Wolfjaw Cliffs. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" And beneath it, one more invitation, not spoken by Caleb, not even by Coda, but by the spirit of every dog who ever guarded a human heart. If you've ever walked through a storm with a companion who never left your side, share their story. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories, where every bark still carries the truth.